Welcome to Friends and Fiction. 4 New York Times bestselling authors, endless stories. Novelists Mary Kay Andrews, Kristin Harmel, Kristy Woodson Harvey, and Patti Callahan Henry are 4 longtime friends with more than 70 published books between them. Together, they host Friends and Fiction, with author interviews and fascinating insider talk about publishing and writing, to highlight and support independent bookstores. They discuss the books they've written, the books they're reading now, and the art of storytelling. If you love books and you're curious about the writing world, you're in the right place.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Friends and Fiction Show. I'm Kristy Woodson Harvey.
I'm Kristin Harmel.
And this is Friends and Fiction, 4 New York Times bestselling authors, endless stories to support indie bookstores, authors, readers like you.
If you're not with us already, we hope you'll join our Facebook group, which is more than 320,000 members strong. How'd that happen?
We were 1,000 and we were like, we have made it, baby.
I know. We'd also like to invite you to follow us on Instagram and YouTube and to subscribe to our Substack newsletter, which is full of awesome bonus content. You can find out more about our community and all we have to offer at friendsandfiction.com.
On this episode, we are so excited to welcome our friends, our new friends, Omid Scobie and Robin Benway, to discuss their new novel, Royal Spin, which was just released on February 10th. But before we do, one of the things that I loved so much about this book is that Omid is probably best known as a royal journalist. So this novel felt like a backstage pass. Kristin, you and I both have journalism backgrounds, although yours more robust than mine. And I know we've talked about this before on the show that, we definitely had skills from journalism that have translated into our lives as novelists. But I'm wondering, is there anything that you ever covered in your career that influenced a novel of yours, like even in a small way?
Yeah. And, I could go on and on about this, but I will keep it brief. I do think, so, I wrote for 12 years for People magazine. And during that time, I got the opportunity to talk to just so many interesting people. One was a Holocaust survivor named Henry Landworth, who I think became one of the pieces of what went into The Sweetness of Forgetting, which was my first World War II novel. But the book most specifically influenced by a journalism story was this book, After, which is a young adult novel I wrote 5 million years ago. It came out in 2010. And it was directly inspired by a story I wrote about a woman named Kate Atwood, who founded a group called Kate's Club for kids who had lost a parent. Kate had lost a parent. I spent a whole bunch of time with these 3 children who had all lost their father. And that directly inspired this book, which is about a girl who's lost her father in a car accident. How about you, Kristy?
I didn't know that. Oh my God. So much, Kristin. I've known you for 100 years and I still don't know everything about you.
Just peeling back the layers. How about
layers?
Something that inspired one of your books?
Yeah. This actually wasn't what I was going to say, but something about what you just said reminded me of it. So when I was in college, I did this women's health beat, which was really fun. And I got to go to the medical school and work. Not work on, but report on studies they were doing and stuff. And there was a lot going on in that time with IVF and frozen embryos and all of that I'm not saying it was new, but it was really exploding. It was when it was just kind of becoming common knowledge. And so I kind of had some background knowledge on that. And then fast forward a few years later, and I had a friend who had some leftover frozen embryos and just had done this early enough, had done IVF early enough that they never thought about what they were going to have to do with them. And she was like, you need to write a book about what people do with their leftover frozen embryos, because it's a big ethical conundrum right now. And that became the book Under the Southern Sky. So, and I think I felt confident writing that because I kind of had this scientific, obviously I had to do a ton of research, but I had a little bit of a knowledge base for that. So anyway.
That totally makes sense. And I remember that at the time, but it's interesting. I feel like coming from a background as a journalist, and it'll be interesting to see what Omid says about this, but I think it helps open doors. You know how to ask questions, you know the things to research, and you know how to weave those details through stories too.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, yay. Let's tell you a little bit about Omid and Robin, and then we'll bring them on.
Absolutely. So Omid Scobie is a British journalist and New York Times bestselling author of Finding Freedom and Endgame, which have been published in more than more than 20 countries. Sorry, that seems to be missing from my script. I think it was more than 20 countries. Omid can correct us when he comes on. I believe that was my fault, Kristy. He spent 12 years covering the royal beat for major outlets, including ABC News, Good Morning America, and Harper's Bazaar. Now based in Los Angeles, Scobie is the co-creator, writer, and executive producer of the TV adaptation of his new novel with Robin, Royal Spin, which of course we're here to talk about today.
Robin Benway is the National Book Award winning and New York Times bestselling author of 9 novels for young adults, which nice tie-in to the young adult today, including Far from the Tree and The Girls of Skylark Lane. Her books have received numerous awards and recognition, including the PEN America Literary Award, the Blue Ribbon Award from the Bulletin for the Center of Children's Books, ALA's Best Books for Young Adults, and ALA's Popular Paperbacks for Young Adults. In addition to her fictional work, her nonfiction has appeared in the Los Angeles Times, Bustle, Elle, and more. Robin currently lives in LA and will also be serving as an executive producer on the TV adaptation of Royal Spin.
Omid and Robin's novel together, Royal Spin, was just published yesterday on February 10th, and it features an irresistibly entertaining story about a young American woman who takes a job at Buckingham Palace, where she finds herself tangled in a royal mess she might not be able to spin her way out of.
Love it. All right, Sean, can you bring Omid and Robin on, please?
Hey.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
What an intro. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for coming on today. We're so excited to be here to talk about this amazing book. So we were discussing this backstage, but I was lucky enough to get an early read of this one. And I immediately texted the group and I was like, we have to see if Omid and Robin will come on the show because this book is so great and it's so perfect for our audience. So I thought I would tell our viewers out there what I said about the book before we dive into what you're going to say about the book. So Omid Scobie and Robin Benway have teamed up to give readers a hilarious, salacious backstage pass to Buckingham Palace and the fascinating world of high society press relations. Swoon-worthy, whip-smart, and oh so charming, Royal Spin reminds us that second chances can come when we least expect them, and happiness is always worth fighting for. It's Veep meets Emily in Paris with the most delicious British accent. So as we mentioned briefly above, Royal Spin is about a young American press aide thrust into the high-stakes world of Buckingham Palace where tradition, scandal, and ambition collide. Yes. As she navigates palace protocol, tangled romances, and secrets that could topple reputations, she discovers that managing the royal image may cost more than she ever expected. So that's a little bit what this book is about. So Omid, this is one of our favorite questions to ask on this show. What is this book really about?
I think
Tell us.
Obviously when Robin and I first sat down to kind of discuss the idea that I had for the story and this world that I wanted to really build out together, Robin didn't have much knowledge of the British monarchy. And that was one thing that obviously I knew that I would have to kind of bring to the table. But I think one of the things that we both immediately connected on was this story of Lauren and her journey, her sort of second coming of age. We often talk about that journey from teen to adulthood. We never really talk about that kind of awkward late 20s to early 30s where everyone expects you to have had your life together. And at one point, Lauren did think her life was together. And of course, as we start the book, it's literally her back to square one, lost the boyfriend, lost the dream apartment, the dream job. And she's in a new country, starting from scratch, having to find herself, rediscover herself, reconnect with herself, and really just learn what she wants to achieve in her life. I think we often feel like when we leave college, that dream that we had at 18 years old doesn't always marry up with who we are age 30. And so I think that was the kind of really enjoyable part of bringing to life Lauren's story, was this kind of very familiar story, I think, that we can all connect to, about sort of finding ourselves in our sort of second coming of age.
Yeah. That's so relatable. Yeah. And you're right. People don't talk about that. And it's such a thing.
Yeah.
That was a huge thing for me when Omid and I first started talking about the book, was that idea of being 27, 28, especially a woman, and with all of social media telling you you've got to have the perfect partner, the perfect house, everything you're doing is wrong, but if you do it this way, it'll all be perfect. And I mean, my life fell apart when I was 27 years old, which is how I ended up being a writer. Sorry, my dog is she's a Velcro dog. She's very clingy.
But I'm surprised mine is asleep right here. He likes to be on my lap. So
he was asleep until we started talking. But yes, I know. But it was this idea of, I want to see what happens when it falls apart. And I want to see how she rebuilds her life, because that was so personal to me, and my story and my journey was, how did I rebuild? So I felt like that was something that really intrigued me, even more than the royal aspect in that sense. And then, of course, throwing her into Buckingham Palace just upped the stakes to the level of, to the power of 10.
Absolutely. It definitely did. So, I think that brings me to this question, which is that this collaboration feels like a perfect collision of worlds. I mean, you're both bringing such different things to the table. Robin, you with your award-winning fiction, and Omid, you with your deep royal reporting. How did this partnership come together? How did you meet? How did you decide to work together? And when did you first realize Royal Spin needed to be a novel rather than a nonfiction project? Robin, you want to start?
Actually, I'm going to defer to Omid, because I feel like the story begins with him, and I'll take it there. Yeah.
Well, I covered the royals for 12 years, and that involved being part of that very small press pack that kind of shadows the royal family as they do their engagements in the UK and around the world. I felt like I'd experienced every single aspect of the royal story, and I'd also told every aspect of it. But during those years, I'd also kept journals and notebooks of like all the like funny, quirky observations that I had behind the scenes that were never quite right for the news story or for a nonfiction read. But I would stand there either in bewilderment or amazement, kind of witnessing unfold in front of me. And I'd always think like, oh, this would make great television. This would make a great book. And, as time went by, I started to think about Lauren, this outsider, sort of within that, and how would she do this? And, I think as a royal correspondent, I was often the odd one out. I was the only one, certainly for a long time, who didn't have kind of a traditional white British background, who was a little younger than a lot of the others when I first joined that fold. And my outlook on a lot of this stuff was very different too. And so I often found that the way I approached the story or the way I wanted to do things didn't always marry up with how everyone else did. And so you start kind of thinking, what if, a lot of the time as you're doing the job. And so again, that sort of fed into this world of Royal Spin that was sort of like slowly building in my head. By the time I'd handed in my manuscript for Endgame, which was my last book, and it was a book that sort of saw me burn all my bridges within the royal world, I wanted to kind of tell the full story. And to do that, I knew I had to kind of like go against the grain in a way that hadn't been before. I was then ready to kind of throw myself into Royal Spin and as a TV project. And at that time was almost when the writers' strike started in the US as well. And so that kind of put all of that on hold. And I was talking with my agent about wanting to still tell this story. And so it felt right to start with a book and then focus on the TV show. And as you know, journalists often work with ghostwriters, especially if they're working on novels. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be really transparent about the fact that this is my first foray into fiction, that I wanted to kind of lean on someone that was an expert, that had a wealth of knowledge on not only writing good fiction, but also like bringing characters to life in a really kind of like multifaceted, like textured, gritty kind of way. And I got sent samples of a bunch of authors, and Robin's was one of the first that I'd read. And there was a way in which, and I started with Far From the Tree, and there was a way in which she brought her characters to life, and not just the central characters, not just the protagonist, but like even just like the minor people that just like make a small appearance, that felt so real. And I thought, well, that's what you need in this kind of huge world that is like the royal press pack and the back of Buckingham Palace. And so when Robin and I connected, we immediately felt like kind of a meeting of minds. Everything that she said, I had something to accompany that, and everything I had said, she had something to complement that. And it kind of, it just made sense from the get-go.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. So did you do Zooms? Did you work in a Google Doc? Like, how did you actually partner up? I'm so curious.
Well, it was so funny because our agents were the ones who obviously introduced us, and we did a Zoom because Omid was still in London at the time. And I was so excited because I was like, do I need to go to London? Like, I'm like, oh, I'll go. Like, I'll do it for the project. And then before I could even ask that question, my agent goes, and he's moving to Los Angeles. I was like, oh, Great.
Like,
I was so disappointed, even though it's been absolutely wonderful having him in the same city as where I live. Like, it's been so helpful. But we met for lunch in person. And the thing that I was most concerned about, especially for this project, was I had written 9 books before this all by myself. And I don't need to tell you two, especially, but it gets messy up here. Like you're very vulnerable. You're throwing a lot of things at the wall and you're trying to figure things out. And I was like, is this someone, I know he's very successful. I know he's talented. There are many successful, talented people out there. Is this someone that I can be in the trenches with? Like, is this someone who we can edit together? We can meet a deadline. Is this someone I want to do a press tour with? Like, all of those things. And so we met in person. We ended up having like almost 4-hour lunch. He ordered fries for the table, I remember, and I was like, let's do it. That's all I need to know. But he was just so lovely. And we started talking about, I was like, okay, this is my vision for Lauren. We talked about the characters and we just immediately, like, it was so lucky and it was so easy in that sense. And I wasn't expecting that at all. And so I remember we had talked about the first chapter extensively at that lunch. And so I wrote 1,000 words and I was like, this is what I'm imagining for the tone, the scope, how it begins. And if this feels right to you, let me know. And then I sent it, I emailed it, and I just kept refreshing the text message, on my phone to see if he liked it. And he loved it. And we just took off from there. And it was, I don't want to say it was easy because writing a book is never easy, but it was very easy to work with Omid. And it was an easy friendship and an easy working relationship.
Oh, how perfect.
Yeah. I give you both big props because I think co-writing is something that is really challenging. I think Kristin and I have both done it, not like outside of like the novel world, but it's hard for me to visualize like how that even works out. So y'all did it very, very well.
Thank you.
So romance plays a very key role in this story, which is great because I don't know if y'all have heard, but romance is hot right now. So but
just found out.
I think the stakes are kind of raised here because you have this romance that is thrilling and risky because they're living in this world where all eyes are on these characters at all times. So Robin, let's start with you. How did you approach writing love interests in a setting where personal and professional lines are always being blurred?
I think tension is great in romance. I don't tell either one of you that, but I feel like Lauren has 2 options available to her that she's very attracted to, one of whom happens to be a duke who has returned to the royal family to be a working royal. And the other one happens to be a reporter for a newspaper who is always trying to get the real story, the real scoop, which is Lauren has been hired to work in the PR, the comms department of Buckingham Palace. And it is her job to shape the narrative, not to let the reporter understand the narrative sometimes, the actual narrative. So it was just great. I feel like Oscar is the journalist that is very interested in Lauren and vice versa, for many reasons, vice versa. And they have a really good rapport. Their intellect is very smart. I kept saying it's like His Girl Friday, where the rat-a-tat, the West Wing walk and talk style. Like they're very sharp and they keep each other on their toes, which, I think is a very attractive trait when you're meeting somebody. But I think for the Duke of Exeter, for Jasper, as he tells her to call him repeatedly, he is someone who has returned to the fold after going through a divorce, after, going bankrupt. And Lauren has moved to London from the US after going through a terrible breakup, losing her best friend, losing her boyfriend, and losing her job at the White House. So I think where they connect is they meet emotionally. They understand what the other one has been through in a way that maybe other people haven't. Granted, Jasper is on a much higher scale, but the stakes are high for both of them in their own personal world. So I feel like when you're writing romance, to have 2 sort of diametrically opposed ideas of who your partner could be is really, really fun. And it's just more about Lauren taking those baby steps again after a breakup to figure out not only who does she want to date, who does she want to partner with, but who is she now? Like, what does she want now after losing everything?
Okay, no spoilers, but did you know going in who she was going to end up with?
No, I didn't. I don't think
it changes for me a lot. Like, that's what I was wondering. Sometimes the love interest that I think is going to be the one ends up not at all. And I think that's so fun.
Well, what was fun, we'd write a scene with Oscar and then I'd be like, ooh, Oscar. he's a good one. And then, you know, the scene with Jasper, and I'd be like, ooh, Jasper. Like, so
right. They're both compelling for very different reasons, which is really fun for the reader. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And as the reader, you're almost kind of rooting for both, I feel like. Yeah. Okay. So Royal Spin is deliciously fun, but it also captures the pressure, the protocol, and the emotional cost of life inside a powerful institution. Omid, how did you balance humor and heart with the very real stakes of public image, loyalty, and ambition?
You know, I think finding that balance between humor and the kind of the seriousness of the job was actually pretty easy because that exists in real life. You know, you only need to look at what the Buckingham Palace press office is dealing with on a daily or weekly basis. And a lot of it is pretty comical. You know, you're having kind of like full-blown like national news meltdowns over the sartorial choice of a member of a royal family or something, which like a lot of this stuff from a distance looks really ridiculous, but you realize that within that bubble, the stakes are really high. It does often mean that the reputation of the royal family or the reputation of other members of the royal family who are not even involved in said scandal are completely affected by that. So you have this group of people that are constantly in like crisis cleanup, protect this one, let that one cast away, you know, it's kind of, and I had seen this happen over and over again in real life. And I think we often, you know, when we're covering the royals, we're always talking about what the royal family members are doing. And I always found it much more interesting, like what was happening behind the scenes, who's pulling the strings, who's making the decisions, and like what does that kind of like back end of the palace even look like? You know, we've seen so many depictions of like the various royal stories over the years. And I think The Crown sort of gave us like the deepest look, but obviously that was a much earlier period of time. But in terms of like the royal family in the 21st century, we don't really know how that looks. Whereas if you look at, say, the White House, there are so many iterations of that on television and in print where we kind of get to see what does that press operation look like. And so I wanted to show that the dilemmas that someone like Lauren would face in the job, based on my own experiences and the experiences I know that others have had that have shared with me over the years, and also show some of those difficulties of navigating the different relationships and connections that you make along the way. I've not had a royal romance of any sorts, but I have experienced that difficulty of I've experienced that difficulty of like navigating like a forbidden friendship or crossing the line with someone that is a friend, but also has to protect the person that you're looking to write the story on. And so I wanted to introduce a lot of those dilemmas and difficulties to Lauren, to Oscar, to Jasper. And, you know, and I think along the way, you do see some of the kind of silliness of just like what really goes on behind palace walls.
Yeah, you captured it really well. Well, on a similar note to that, I mean, this novel spans glamorous London clubs and rarely seen corners of Buckingham Palace. Like, as someone who, I mean, I've been to London, but you know, these are not places that like I've had access to, right? So being able to kind of be a part of that world was really interesting. So, Robin, were those things that you were really counting on Omid to sort of describe and fill in the gaps? Like, did y'all do any extra research for this, or was it just things that were already kind of essentially a part of your knowledge?
You know, I think for me, like, even though I've only written fiction, I heavily research all my fiction. Like, I am literally on Google Maps figuring out what the trash can is on a Paris, you know, because that's, like I said, I live in LA. And when I read a book that's set in LA and they get it wrong, it takes me out of the story. And maybe, you know, 95% of the readers don't realize that. But I just love to have facts within my fictional worlds. So when I first met Omid, that was something I was really excited about is, oh, he knows so much that not only I don't know, but the rest of the world doesn't know in terms of what the cafeteria at Buckingham Palace looks like. There is a cafeteria at Buckingham Palace, you know, that sort of thing. So I wouldn't say I didn't really do any other research. I mean, we both would like look up certain facts or certain situations or what does that look like now kind of thing. But it was just so lovely to work with someone who not only understood how to tell a story, but also knew how to infuse it with as many facts as possible, so that should a fellow person in the royal rota read it, or a royal correspondent, they would recognize that scene. Because I think that authenticity rings true. Even if you don't know, you can feel it in the book. That's important.
100%. I mean, it's the small details, I feel like, that bring it to life. And the small details you actually have to live to know, like something you couldn't look up on Google or look up in images. Like you would have walked those steps as you did, Omid. Yeah, that absolutely.
It's always been the most important thing to me, those small details. And even when I wrote Finding Freedom all those years ago, it was obviously a story that was dealing with facts and real reporting. But I would go to places where I knew that, say, if we're telling the story of Harry and Meghan's first date, and we knew that Meghan was wearing a dress, I'm like, okay, well, what hair would she have been on? What fabric would have been against her leg? What was the wallpaper behind them? What was the lighting like in the room? How did that place smell? You know, like you can bring in so much color alongside the kind of reporting itself to tell a really vivid version of that story. And so being able to bring all of that into this world as well, like I've taken so many photos and notes of just like the most random places over the years. And so a lot of what we're describing in the book is like the very area in the palace that someone sitting there right now working from would recognize from top to bottom on the page.
Ah, that's great. Well, Omid, you've spent years reporting on the monarchy. So for you, with this book, what was the most liberating piece about exploring palace life through fiction instead of through journalism?
Oh, breaking away from the confines of the who, what, where, and when. I think that was my biggest challenge at the beginning as well, was that, you know, you want to tell a realistic version of events, but obviously you want to tell a version of that that doesn't exist. And I often found myself kind of butting heads with myself where I was like, well, that's not real, or that couldn't happen, or that doesn't go that way. And it was often Robin that would remind me, like, you know, you can, if you're stuck, you can just make it up. And I was like, oh, yeah, sure. And so break as a journalist who is like, you know, you're looking to double and triple source stuff. You are so wedded to what is only available to you. And you have to tell a story regardless of whether there's gaps within some of the reporting or whatever. And so there was this sense of freedom that came with that was like really liberating. And like, as we kind of really found our groove, I kind of really lent heavy on that. Yeah. It's almost hard to imagine going back to the kind of like prison of just dealing with what's in your reporter's notebook.
It really is. It took me several books to transition away from that idea in my head that like, I can't write it if I don't know it 100% for sure. You know, like that idea that like, oh my gosh, you can use your imagination to fill in the gaps. It's just crazy. As someone who's such an insider in that world, Omid, were you worried that you might face criticism for lifting the veil, even if it was in a fictional way?
No, because I have probably, even in my reporting, been the royal correspondent that has exposed the most or pulled the curtain back in the kind of most dramatic way possible. And I feel like with Endgame, that was a real sign off for my sort of life as a full-time royal correspondent. And this project coming straight afterwards was just an opportunity to actually look at the fun side of it. You know, I'm not having to scrutinize publicly funded officials in this book. You know, this is simply the joys that come with that job. You know, the stories of like some of those unsung heroes at the palace that we never really get to talk about, and the sacrifices they make in this role. You know, we often talk about like how hard it must be for a royal, or how, you know, the challenges that they face. But what about the poorly paid junior press secretary who is up at all hours navigating someone else's scandal, who never really gets the proper thanks for it, that is up against the traditions and protocol of an institution that doesn't want to necessarily advance into the modern age? You know, there is so much at stake. And I've been friends with a lot of those royal press aides over the years, and I've seen the tears, I've seen the struggles. And again, like, those are stories for them to tell themselves, but I would see repeated challenges up and time again. And I wanted to kind of like bring a kind of amalgamation of those to the kind of world that Lauren and the gang are operating in.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. Yep.
Yeah. So Robin, you've obviously, as we heard, had a really extraordinary career in young adult fiction. Yeah. So why now? Like what about this felt like the right moment to make that transition into adult fiction? And did anything surprise you about it?
I think in terms of the transition, I just kind of felt like, and I'm not saying this, I'll never write YA again, but I feel like in the moment I had just said what I wanted to say. You know, I'd written 8 young adult novels, a middle grade. I've been working, my first book came out in 2008. So, you know, I feel like I put my boots on the ground. Like I have done the work. And I also know that my audience has grown up, you know, kids who are reading me when they were 15 or 35 now. And which is great. And I'm still, you know, approaching younger audiences and talking with them and doing school visits and all of that. But when this project came up, and the idea that, again, Lauren is, you know, in her late 20s and her whole life falls apart, that was something I had never written about before. Something I had always written about was that moment when you do leave the nest, when you are 16, 17, 18 years old, and you're figuring out who you are in terms of your relationship to your parents, in terms of who are your friends? Are you going to college? Are you going to succeed? What does succeeding even mean? So I feel like that was a natural progression into writing about Lauren and then putting her on a platform and in a world that is so beyond what I think she could have imagined in terms of the scope, in terms of the importance. She's coming from the White House, but she's coming from a world that she understands, that sort of American style of, you know, politics. To go to Buckingham Palace is so different. So I just felt like once I met Omid and we started talking about this idea, it just felt so, I didn't have any doubt at all. Like I just knew that this was the next project for me. And it was just ultimately very serendipitous.
That's great. That's a good feeling to have.
It's a great feeling to have. Yeah.
And I feel like there's something to be said for continually challenging yourself as an author. So like if you feel like you've said the things you needed to say, sometimes you have to step away, you know, in order to get that new perspective, I think.
I've always said for every book I've done, I did something different. I wrote first person, then I wrote third person, then I wrote 3 perspectives, and then I wrote a book backwards. Don't ever do that. Like,
I still think you're crazy for that.
I'm still recovering, and it's been years. But I did an IP with Disney, and I did a middle grade. So once this project came along, I was like, oh, this is the new thing. This is my new challenge, is how do I do this? And I think that's kept not only me fresh, so to speak, but just interested in the work that I do. It never gets boring.
Well, it keeps you growing too. I mean, I feel the same way. And I think Kristy does too. I think we're always challenging ourselves to do something new.
You have to.
Speaking of something new, Kristy and I both work a little bit in the film world too. We've both worked on adaptations of our books and things like that. I know you guys have a TV adaptation already in development at Universal. So the story's obviously resonating beyond the page. So Omid, as we heard up top, you're going to be writing the adaptation. How closely are you planning to stick to the novel? And can you give us any hints?
Yeah, you know, I think the novel very much does set out the kind of what that first season would look like. You know, I think Lauren's journey and the arc that she's on is something that will kind of be central to the series. But I think what will be really fun about the show is that there's so much visually that works better on the page and stuff that's better on the screen. Something that is like a throwaway gag doesn't work on the page, but as something you might notice in the press office would be a really funny moment. So I think it's bringing to life some of the things that we knew wouldn't work in the book and vice versa. There's so much in the book that works better on the page because we have that room to really explore it. And obviously the pace of television is very different. But I think in terms of like what we love about the characters and the journeys that they're on, that is very much kind of central to the first season. It'll be interesting to see over time, and obviously so much comes at play here, but how closely the two will follow beyond the first book. You know, Robin and I have a lot of ideas for sort of like for the books to continue, and obviously the show may end up taking on its own life too. So I think that'll be the most interesting part and probably the biggest challenge as well.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. Robin, I know you're going to be an executive producer on the project too. How involved will you be?
I'm not as involved. You know, I have my own projects in development as well that I'm working on. And I have always felt and still very much feel like the genesis of this project was with Omid and his experience. Like I was so happy to share an equal part in its development, but I know this is very important to Omid. And so knowing that he's in the room, he's working on the pilot script with our showrunner, Emily Fox, who's lovely. I feel like it is in perfect hands. You know, if he wasn't involved, I would 1000% step in, because that feeling of we have to make sure the work is translated as well as possible. But I've seen the pilot episodes. Omid shares everything with me. He tells me after every meeting, like what they said, what they didn't like, what they liked, all of those kinds of things. We were on multiple, it was a 9-way auction for the TV rights. So we were on multiple Zooms, so many Zooms, not champagne problem, not complaining at all, but like we were in it together from the beginning. And I just know that he and Emily are going to do a fantastic job with it.
Absolutely.
I think there's something to be said for you being a step outside of it too, because you can weigh in with a fresh eye each time. You know the story, you know the characters so intimately, but like sometimes, I don't know, Kristy, if you feel this way too, but I feel like sometimes you just get so mired in the script because you've been through so many versions of it. Minute changes to it, but to be able to give it to someone who hasn't been involved at that level is probably a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's often happened. There have been moments where Robin has pointed something out and I'm like, well, duh, but obviously you're sort of in the middle of it and you're like, I didn't notice that. And you are, I think there was one point where we were so involved with the TV development, and then we were also sort of still finishing off edits with the book. And I was like, which one is which? It's like, you have to really remind yourself, like, was that criticism for the show or for the book? But it's been an interesting process. And I think for me, I love this foray into kind of fiction writing, and I definitely want to do more of it. But I always said, after kind of like tying up the royal stuff, that for me, it's always been about storytelling. I want to explore other ways to tell stories, bring people's experiences to life, whether they be true or based on, or they're just based on fiction. So I think it's been nice to be able to kind of have a taste of all of these things and kind of see what I want to do more of beyond that.
That makes sense.
Yeah. All right. Well, Omid and Robin, if you would stick around, we have more to talk to you about. But first, a few quick reminders for our listeners and viewers out there.
So for all of you watching and listening, we encourage you to rush out and buy your copies of Royal Spin. And why would you not after that conversation? The perfect place to do that is in the Friends and Fiction shop on bookshop.org. You will not only be getting it at a discount, but all your purchases there support our show, our guests, and indie bookstores nationwide. And there's the great cover of the book. Absolutely.
And don't forget to visit friendsandfiction.com for details on our show schedule, upcoming in-person events, and links to our merch store, our Substack newsletter sign up, and the award-winning Friends and Fiction official book club with Brenda and Lisa. Their next book club discussion will happen on Monday, February 23rd, when they host Vanessa Riley to discuss her new novel, Fire, Sword, and Sea.
Speaking of our Substack, you can read all our free weekly posts on the Substack website or app, or subscribe for free to get them directly in your inbox. And if you upgrade to our paid Substack, which costs just $5 a month, you'll have access to deeper dives with all our weekly show guests like Omid and Robin, plus occasional roundtable discussions and regular in-depth interviews and features with some of your favorite authors, like the recent ones we did with Jamie Brenner and Jesse Q. Satanto. If you enjoy tuning in for our weekly author interviews, this is a big way you can support us for about $1 every week. Check us out at friendsandfiction.substack.com. So Omid and Robin, before we let you go, we have to ask, where can we catch up with you on the road, and where can we catch you online?
Well, I'm on Instagram. So it's just at Robin Benway, very straightforward. I also have a website that has contact info, the about me. It's robinbenway.com. I've very wedded to one handle for everything. So and then, in terms of where we'll be on the road, we are going to be in Brooklyn tonight on the 11th to talk about the book. We'll be at the Barnes & Noble in Carroll Gardens, I believe, in Atlantic Avenue. And then we'll be at Vroman's Bookstore, which is my local indie, which I'm very excited about. We'll be there on Valentine's Day, the 14th at 3 p.m. And I think it'll be just a fun... Valentine's Day can be tricky for so many people. So hopefully this is just a fun, happy, great, all are welcome style event. We'll be there at 3 p.m. at Vroman's.
That is awesome. And Omid, how about you? Where can we find you online?
Yeah, I mean, if you search for my name on Instagram or Twitter or TikTok, I'm there some more active than others. But yeah, it's as you know, as authors, you're sort of like forever trying to figure out which platform is like more beneficial for you. And I've sort of spread myself a little bit thin. But yeah, Robin and I are really looking forward to sort of taking the book on the road a little bit. We have some events coming up in March as well for the book. So it'll, I think you spend so long in that bubble of like creating something and not really knowing what anyone thinks about it. And so this moment where first we get to sit down with the likes of you and other authors and journalists and kind of hear that initial feedback. But of course, like you want to hear from the public who've actually gone out and bought the book as well. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing kind of what people liked, what people want more of, which characters they resonated with, what are the kind of favorites within the book that you haven't even really thought about might be the kind of hit of the book. So yeah, that's the fun stuff.
For sure. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. It was such a pleasure speaking with you. And thanks to everyone out there for being with us on Friends in Fiction.
Oh, thank you so much. This was just a joy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We loved having you. All right. So everyone out there, tune in 2 weeks from tonight on February 25th, when Ron and Patti will welcome Tara Shelton Harris to discuss her new novel, Where the Wildflowers Grow. That show will air on the Friends in Fiction Facebook page and YouTube channel on Wednesday, February 25th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And it'll be published to our podcast for your listening pleasure on Friday, February 27th.
Thanks again for being with us, and see you all next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in. You can join us every week on Facebook or YouTube, where our live show airs on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram. We're so glad you're here.